Denny Hamlin says that NASCAR race weekends should look more like Formula One race weekends. Let's react. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. We've got a few news stories to catch up on, some good news for drivers, some unfortunate news to discuss. We're going to talk about Denny Hamlin's Formula One comments here in just a moment. But first, my boy Ryan Vargas, friend of the show, Xfinity Series driver, is hosting an appearance in the Kansas City area. He's rocking a special Swan paint scheme this weekend. Swan's a great partner of Out of the Groove as well. So if you want to learn more about where you can meet Ryan Vargas tonight, you gotta be quick. Click that link down in the description below. And also, before we get to all the news here today, this episode is sponsored by Wenzel's Farm. Wenzel's Farm is a premium provider of high-quality small batch meat snacks and products. Real meat for real life, no artificial flavors, artificial colors, corn syrup, anything like that. They've got more than 13 varieties of their snack sticks. These are all jalapeno cheddar. All of their various flavors are gluten-free. And Wenzel's also has a line of premium beef jerky. This comes in original beef, peppered beef, and teriyaki flavors. Fans of Out of the Groove can get a special discount by heading to wenzelsfarm.com. Use code FUEL at checkout to get 20% off your order. I've gotten tweets and messages from fans who've already taken advantage of that special offer. They say Wenzel's Farm is delicious. I think it's delicious, so be sure to check them out. That's Wenzel's Farm. Thank you to Wenzel's for sponsoring Out of the Groove this season. Now let's get to the news. First, let's start with some good news. Brandon Jones fans, where are y'all at? Brandon Jones announced this week that he will be back in the 19 car next season for Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity Series. Menards will apparently sponsor him for every single race next year, so that's a pretty big deal. Brandon Jones is still currently in a championship battle this season. He's in the round of 8, although right now I think he's 8th on the playoff grid, kind of in a must-win scenario going into these next 2 races. It's been a weird year for Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity Series. Jones, Burton, Hemrick have not won a race this year, but that 54 with several different drivers has won, I think, 10 times now. But despite not winning any races this year, he still made a fairly deep playoff run. Last year, Brandon Jones put up the best numbers of his career, winning 3 times and making it to the round of 8. He'll be 25 years old by the time next season begins. Jeff Mendering is staying on as his crew chief, so at least some consistency for Joe Gibbs Racing in their Xfinity program, because I think they're going to see some turnover elsewhere. We know Harrison Burton is going cup racing with the Wood brothers. Daniel Hemrick is leaving for a different Xfinity team. Reports say Ty Gibbs is expected to land a full-time Xfinity ride, but still going to be a different look for Joe Gibbs Racing in the second series next season. Now, some more troubling news from yesterday. Driver Carson Ware was arrested yesterday morning and was indefinitely suspended by NASCAR as a result. The 21-year-old was expected to drive the 17 car in Saturday's Xfinity race, but that obviously will not happen now. Additional details are starting to come out, but Ware was arrested Wednesday morning on misdemeanor charges of assault on female, simple assault, and injury to personal property. Rick Ware put this statement out last night. This morning, I was notified of a situation that involved Carson Ware. At this time, Carson has been indefinitely suspended by SS Greenlight Racing and NASCAR. While I am frustrated by the actions of Carson, I am even more disappointed for Bobby Daughter and his entire team. Bobby has been a great ally through the years, and I hate to see SS Greenlight Racing under scrutiny due to actions that do not reflect the reputation and image that Bobby has worked hard to uphold over the years. My hope is that Carson will get the help that he needs during this difficult time. Yeah, and like I said, details are slowly starting to be revealed, but like Rick Ware says in his statement, I just hope Carson Ware gets the help that he needs. I'm glad to see NASCAR and the teams, though, taking these incidents seriously, and hopefully everything gets resolved eventually. That is the latest from that situation as of Thursday morning. Now let's talk about Formula One. I live in Texas. I live a couple hours away from Austin, and this weekend, the U.S. Grand Prix will be taking place at Circuit of the Americas. Formula One heads to the U.S. for their one and only race this season. I know next year they've got a second one scheduled. Formula One is the largest and is generally perceived as the most prestigious motorsport in the world. So naturally, when they head to the United States for the first time, the only time this year, it's garnering a lot of attention. We've seen Daniel Ricciardo, McLaren driver, is going to apparently drive one of Dale Earnhardt's old race cars at Circuit of the Americas this weekend. That's a pretty awesome crossover. With F1 coming to the United States this week, there's obviously been a lot of conversation, a lot of chatter in the motorsports world about Formula One, its place in America, its recent growth in America, its future plans in America, which we can talk about. But I also saw this morning an article in motorsport.com, Denny Hamlin, NASCAR driver, of course, championship contender, speaking to the media. And he basically said out loud a lot of the exact things I've been thinking about the past couple of years. So I wanted to read these quotes from Denny Hamlin, we'll react to them, and then I wanted to talk about Formula One's place in America and how it relates to NASCAR's future more specifically. Here's what Denny Hamlin said when asked about Formula One. I think this year I've probably watched more F1 races than I have my whole life, for sure. Some of that is driven by social media. My friends are tuning into it. You see the American press is giving it more attention this year. Obviously, when you see a buzz or see something on social media about it, you want to kind of tune in and see what's going on. That's kind of driven my interest in it more so than anything. Hamlin also mentioned that Netflix's Drive to Survive series, which they made in conjunction with Formula One, a behind-the-scenes look into Formula One, really, that's helped boost his interest in the sport, as it has, I'm sure, millions of fans across the world, and probably thousands or hundreds of thousands in the US alone. But he says more, we'll talk about in a second, but I want to break this down. Those first couple of lines there, Formula One does in fact have a massive presence on social media. I mean, it is bigger than NASCAR, for example. It's a worldwide motorsport. It's huge, massive in Europe, and it's growing in the United States. So a lot of the content that I see on Twitter that's Formula One based, it's usually coming from someone in the UK, people in various parts of Europe. So some of it comes from the US for sure. There's definitely plenty of US content creators or US fans that are feeding into that conversation. But when Formula One races are happening, often even when Formula One races aren't happening, at least on my Twitter feed, I see a ton of F1 stuff recommended. I do not follow very many F1 Twitter accounts or personnel, I guess. My Twitter feed is like 98% NASCAR, but I get a lot of Formula One notifications. They're great on social media. They get a buzz going. And Denny Hamlin admits right there that, that draws him in. And it's drawn me in. I've watched more Formula One races this year than I have at any other point in my life as well. But Hamlin talking about the buzz on social media, the fact that the American press is giving it more attention, that's just the beginning of it. But again, he's kind of verbalizing things I've been thinking about, and I'm sure many of you guys have been thinking about for months or years at this point as well. But he goes on. This next bit is even more interesting to me. Hamlin says, it's crazy because you've got probably a 90% chance of picking which two guys are going to win each Formula One race. This year has been a little bit different with craziness going on, but there's two people that can win, two teams that can win. There's not much side-by-side racing as compared to NASCAR, but yet fans and media love it. I mean, Hamlin's exactly right. I think the obvious answer to that is maybe fans do love a winner. They love dominance. Think about Tiger Woods in golf. I mean, he was dominating, but golf had never been more popular. NBA's ratings were massive a few years ago when the Warriors and LeBron were meeting in the finals pretty much every single year. Fans loved that stuff, even though everyone kind of knew at the beginning of the season who was going to win the championship or who was going to have a shot at it. Tom Brady's dominance in football. Fans either love to see it or love to hate it. Either way, they're tuning in. But Hamlin, they're making the same observation I've always made. That's part of why I never really got into Formula One, because I do like the parity within NASCAR. I love that there's really now 20 guys who have a fairly realistic shot of winning every week. Sure, there's like 7 or 8 that have a really good shot, but still 7 or 8, that's more than the 3 or 4 that have a really good shot at winning Formula One on a weekly basis. So I like the parity, I like the mixing it up, the various stories in NASCAR. That's always drawn me to NASCAR over Formula One. But anyway, just hearing Hamlin again verbalize the thoughts I've had for a while is interesting. He goes on, when you talk about how critical fans or media or whoever might be of our racing in NASCAR, it's heads and shoulders above anything going on right now. The show is good. Why can't we get people to turn out? Texas was a big disappointment seeing what was up in the stands there, and yet we're talking about the biggest crowd in history showing up for the COTA F1 race next week. So there's some kind of disconnect that's going on that's not making this deal work. I mean, nobody wants to admit it, but he's got a point. There were maybe 20, 30,000 fans in the stands at Texas Motor Speedway. Oh, I saw, I think Red Bull Racing, the Formula One team was doing some sort of, showcase thing in downtown Dallas like the same weekend, and they might have had the same amount of people there just in the streets of Dallas watching a car drive around and do burnouts. Like, wow. Obviously, scarcity plays a massive role in this. There's only one Formula One race in the United States this year, so naturally, hundreds of thousands of fans are going to pour into Austin for that one and only event. That's the only chance they're probably going to get to watch a race in person all year. Meanwhile, NASCAR has 38 Cup races, another 33 Xfinity races, another 22, 23 truck races. NASCAR, there is no shortage of NASCAR content around this country on a weekly basis. So, of course, scarcity in the supply is going to increase the demand for that race. So, but at the same time, we should not ignore the fact that more than 300,000 fans are expected to show up in Austin, Texas this weekend. Like, we should not ignore that. Qualify it with all these various factors, sure, but that's still a huge crowd. That is massive. I mean, other than the Indy 500 that gets 200, 300,000 fans out there every year, like, there are not many other events in the world that pull in that kind of crowd. So Hamlin being willing to acknowledge that, I think is a good step in the right direction. He finishes this statement, this quote, by saying this: I would love to see us have more of an F1 style approach to a race weekend and how we host hospitalities, parties, just all of those things. So Hamlin is zeroing in on the at-track experience. How do we make these races feel more like a can't-miss event that brings in hundreds of thousands of casual fans in addition to the hardcore racing fans? How do we make that possible? Look, I love going to NASCAR races, but especially in the last 2 years, especially since COVID began, the at-track experience has been severely slimmed down. We've already harped on the no practice, no qualifying for most races. That, to me, diminishes some of the value of camping out or staying at the track all weekend long. But even outside the track and inside the track, they've slimmed down on the amount of booths, the amount of driver appearances and everything, mostly due to COVID. But it feels like as COVID maybe begins to wane, a lot of those changes have become somewhat permanent. So Hamlin critiquing NASCAR's at-track experience, I think, is absolutely due. Formula One has a bigger budget than NASCAR does. That's absolutely true. And when Formula One only has one race in the United States, the city, the state, the country is going to help support them. Every U.S. sponsor is going to pour into that and focus on that event. Like, again, it's not exactly a fair comparison. A NASCAR Cup race at Kansas, of which there are 38 other Cup races a year, is naturally not going to get the same attention that the one and only F1 race in the US of the entire season is going to look like. So it's obviously differences. You're comparing apples to oranges, but there are still things I think Hamlin says there that are true that NASCAR could hopefully adapt and maybe learn from Formula One going forward. And I think NASCAR is, because that's what I want to talk about now. F1 is clearly taking aim at the United States, specifically the United States market. They're not targeting NASCAR. They're not coming after NASCAR. We want to run NASCAR out of business, but they look at the United States as a massive market. Obviously, a lot of money in the United States, a lot of people in the United States, a lot of sponsors, a lot of corporate sponsors in the United States. They look at the fact that Formula One's audience there has grown significantly in the last couple of years, a lot of that due to the success of the Netflix documentary. And naturally, the heads at Liberty Media want to capitalize on that. I mean, that's just good business, I guess. You go where the money is, you go where the momentum is, I guess. That's why Circuit of the Americas, they're very excited about the numbers they're seeing this year. That's why Miami has been added to the schedule. There's going to be a street race in Miami next May. And even as recently as this week, reports are that they're talking to Las Vegas about possibly sending an F1 race to Las Vegas in the coming seasons. At least Las Vegas is pushing for it. Look, I'm not trying to look at this from a purely competitive standpoint. Like, I couldn't care less if NASCAR is the most popular motorsport or if Formula One's the most popular motorsport in America. I'd like all motorsports to ultimately get more popular than they are. I'd like more people to be talking about them. I'd like to share the fun experiences I've had watching motorsports for years. I'd like to share that with as many people as possible and try to get more and more people to resonate with that. But I will admit I am more partial to NASCAR. I enjoy the NASCAR product a lot more. I want to see NASCAR succeed more than I care if Formula One succeeds. Again, I want everyone to succeed. I'm not rooting for anyone's demise, but I'm more partial to the NASCAR side of things, so that's what I want to focus on in this video. So how can NASCAR protect their territory, if you will? NASCAR has to decide what it wants to be, once and for all. Obviously, they believe the future is more short tracks and road courses. I think they believe fans are more interested in road courses. The success of Formula One maybe would back that up, perhaps. Of course, NASCAR also has super speedway racing that's always popular, so they're sort of trying to turn a lot of the intermediate races into small super speedways, so that's what NASCAR is going to become. Short tracks, road courses, and super speedways. I think that's the identity they want their on-track product to assume. But when it comes to branding, more broadly, this is where I think Formula One has a built-in natural advantage over NASCAR. Formula One is largely worldwide, and you have entire countries pretty much supporting specific drivers or specific teams. It plays the same way World Cup soccer plays, and why that's such a huge deal on the world stage. NASCAR does not naturally have that same built-in advantage. NASCAR is primarily a southeastern United States sport. They've tried in the last 25, 30 years and succeeded in many ways to become a more nationwide sport and even a worldwide sport in certain instances. But when it's all ultimately said and done, they are a primarily southeastern United States sport. And there's a cultural, there's a perception, there's an identity that is associated with that ultimately, I think, limits the amount of fans NASCAR can hope to speak to, that they hope to relate to. I think, there's a specific southeastern culture, and there's a specific perception of that culture that is not naturally going to be appealing to wide swaths of people across the country and across the world. I think to a lot of people out there, specifically a lot of younger people out there, NASCAR is too Ricky Bobby. And I'm sorry, that kind of stuff is not going to appeal to massive audiences. And that's why I think Fox has made a big mistake in the last couple of years. I think they've played into that too far, and I think that's backfiring. NASCAR and everyone involved are clearly trying to push back against that narrative, though. I mean, Michael Jordan and Pitbull are team owners now in the sport. That's crazy. Next year they're remodeling, or the year after they're remodeling Auto Club Speedway in Southern California to be a state-of-the-art new short track. They're going to the LA Memorial Coliseum for the Clash next year. So they're still attempting to be a nationwide, at the very least, series. And speaking of Netflix, NASCAR has that Bubba Wallace Netflix show in development, apparently. So, they're going to have a play on Netflix as well as Formula One in the coming months. But still, naturally, like I said, NASCAR's roots, I think, are going to limit its scope, its scale. NASCAR doesn't need to be as big as Formula One. If NASCAR wants to commit to being more of a niche sport, they just say, hey, we're going to double down on the fact that we're a mostly southeastern sport, and we're going to focus on that. I think that could be a potential business model. But I think since NASCAR in the last 20 years has gotten that taste of nationwide, worldwide phenomenon feeling, I don't think they're going to let go of that. You know, if NASCAR were to condense itself into becoming a primarily southeastern sport, the money would get smaller, driver salaries would go down, the teams would be smaller, sponsors would be less. Like, it would have to be a smaller, a much more downsized, scaled down sport. And I don't think they want to do that. I think they can still become a nationwide relevant sport. And if they succeed in doing that, there's more money for the teams, more people involved, higher salaries for the drivers, for the crew members, everything. And I think they think that's better. And, you know, obviously if you can get more money, if you can support more people, that's what you want to do. But anyways, I guess to wrap up this whole tangent, the movie Talladega Nights did more to hurt NASCAR's brand than it did to help it. That's my opinion. I grew up in the South, or I grew up in Texas, and, you know, I'd watch SpongeBob episodes that were broadcast to national mass audiences that would shamelessly make fun of Texas. And I like Texas. It's my home. It's where I've grown up. There's a lot of great things to like about Texas. But when I've met people who don't live in Texas or aren't as familiar with Texas, it's clear that many people have a different perception of Texas, have in some cases, a negative perception. And I think the same thing goes for Southern culture, what NASCAR is purported to be. Whether or not you think their perceptions are correct, it doesn't matter. The truth is those perceptions are real. That is the reality on the ground. And sometimes it's hard to overcome stereotypes. It's hard to change people's minds, give people a new perspective of something. And I think that is in some ways kind of hurting NASCAR, or built in, or hurting NASCAR in the sense that it's never, or likely never, going to be able to achieve the same mass appeal that Formula One has been able to. So I got way sidetracked off of Denny Hamlin's comments, but just an interesting discussion about Formula One and NASCAR's place. Formula One is on the rise in America. We'll see how long it lasts. It could last forever. It could always go up. It'll probably ebb and flow at some point or another, like anything does. But F1 and NASCAR are going to learn to coexist in the United States, and fans are going to have their preferences, and we'll see which one ultimately reigns supreme in the United States of America. But leave your comments down below. I know I sort of just ranted and rambled on for a long time. Thank you to Work Pro Tools for sponsoring the show so I can have rambling rants like this one, but I appreciate you guys watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. That's all I've got. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new. We talk NASCAR news, notes, rumors, predictions, race reactions, and much, much more nearly every single day. Sometimes there's a Formula One twist to it like today. And as always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. I couldn't do this show without your continued support. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you all in the next video. Have a great rest of your week, folks.